Hello and welcome to the Fascinated by Fungi podcast. I'm Dr. Gordon Walker, and today we're going to talk about mycomaterials, or next generation materials being made with mushrooms and mycelium and other fungal byproducts. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for listening. I've had quite a bit of feedback recently about the audio and lack thereof of quality, especially on some of the earlier recordings. It took me a while to kind of get things figured out. I have a USB mic that is plugged into my iPad now, so that's what you're getting on YouTube. I will do my best to talk closer to the mic so you can hear me better. And I've got a little strap-on mic here that I'm going to be using for my phone for call-in, and it seems to be doing okay. However, I have a PhD in biochemistry. I am not a professional sound engineer. If there's anyone out there who has experience with sound engineering and you think it could help me out, please feel free to reach out, because I know I could do better and I wish the audio quality was better so you guys could hear me express my ideas in optimum sound quality. That would be great. I'm still working on it, so again, thanks for bearing with me. I just want to do a couple of kind of housekeeping things at the start here, and then we'll jump in and talk about MycoMaterials. But first, I do want to plug, I'm going to be hosting a mushroom weekend, foray, looking for hopefully morels, maybe some porcini, up in the Sierra foothills. That is going to be June 3rd through the 5th. And right now we are looking for couples, because specifically we have some double occupancy rooms. Doesn't have to be romantic couples, but two people willing to share a bed, basically. The cost of that will be $2,200. We've brought the cost down a little bit to make it more affordable. But the cost is going towards the fact that we're going to be hosting chef's tasting menus. So what you're really paying for is very high quality, customized food, multi-course dinners, cooked by Chef Julie Schreiber and myself. And you're paying for the experience of going foraging with me and with Professor David Campbell, who's been foraging for morels for like over 30, 40 years. He's incredibly knowledgeable. We'll be scouting out spots. We'll be sure to take you to places where you have a very high chance of finding good stuff. We'll also be doing some educational things along with cocktail hours and spending lots of personal attention. So this is a really special opportunity to hang out with me. And I get people all the time telling me they want to go foraging with me, that they want to eat my food. This is your chance. You get a whole weekend, unfettered access to hanging out with me, getting to know Julie and David too from Myco Ventures. It should be a really fun time. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me, fascinatedbyfungi@gmail.com. Right now, the way to do this is you'll be paying me through Venmo or PayPal, or you can write out a check and send it to me. But putting payment on the table is how you reserve a spot. So if you're interested, please reach out. I'm happy to give you more details. But right now, we are actively trying to fill these spots, and there's not a lot left. So if you're interested, please reach out. If you like what I'm doing and you appreciate the podcast, please share it with your friends, share it with your family. Let people know that I've got a podcast. It's been a really fun experience to do this, but I'm still not super practiced at running a podcast. This is just me doing a live stream at my literal kitchen table. So this is what you get. There's no production, there's no editing, there's no nothing. It's just shooting from the hip. It's really the only way I could do this, because if I had to go back and edit stuff, I probably would never get around to posting it. So this is what we're doing. If you like that and you like what I do, please go on to the apps, Spotify, Apple, Callin, YouTube. Write me a review, especially on Spotify and Apple. I would really, really appreciate you guys writing some reviews, because that helps people find my podcast. And it's actively not being prioritized by Google at the moment because it doesn't have any reviews. And so I still have people telling me they're having a hard time finding the podcast. It does exist. The links to the Spotify and Apple one are on the call-in page. I've been able to search it through Spotify, but I've had trouble finding it on Apple unless I go to the link on the call-in page. So again, I'll try to make sure all these links are on my website, easily accessible. You guys can find them. But please write me a review. That would be awesome and very helpful to me. If you have only negative things to say, you can keep it to yourself. But if you have positive stuff, again, that would be much appreciated. I'm always open to constructive feedback and hearing what you guys want to hear more of, maybe we want to hear less of. And I am sincerely trying to make the audio as good as I can for a quick live stream. So also, if you'd like to support me, I do have Fasted by Fungi merch on my website. I've got cool t-shirts, leggings, mugs, all sorts of cool stuff. If you want to see anything specific or you'd like a design on a particular item, let me know because I can make that happen. I also have a Patreon, so if you want to get some updates from me on how my writing for the book is going, or you want to make recipe requests, or you just want to see a little bit of my personal travel logs, subscribe to my Patreon. It's like $3 a month, and it really helps me out. There are some higher tier options where I will end up sending you mushmersh or a mushroom care package, as I call it, where I pack a bunch of dried mushrooms and some stickers and stuff like that together. Anyhow, check out my Patreon if you're interested and you feel like supporting me. All of that is much appreciated. And in lieu of sending any money or buying anything, just share my podcast, share my videos, check them out. I appreciate every little bit that you guys do to help me out. So let's jump into Mycomaterials and talk about it, because this is a super interesting subject. It's certainly one that comes up a lot when I talk about the future of mushrooms, sustainability of mushrooms, and trying to take the focus away of mushrooms as being always seen as like drugs or psychedelics, or even as edibles. I think there's a whole slew of things that are kind of activated when you say the word mushroom, and people don't normally think of, well, they could be clothing, they could be building materials, they could be insulation, they could be packing stuff. It's all, the world of this stuff is absolutely fascinating, and there's so many different companies in the startup space right now working on different ways to kind of capture lightning in a bottle and figure out interesting ways that we can use fungi to potentially remediate some of the plastic that has, seeped into our world everywhere, because we need viable alternatives to plastics. And if you listen to my bioremediation thing, you know that I'm a little skeptical about sort of breaking down plastics with fungi, but I love the idea of replacing plastics with fungi specifically. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll talk, sort of about like the basic theory, structure, types of mycomaterials, dive into the companies a little bit, and then at the end talk about some of the reasons, again, why we're doing this. So a lot of this stuff came out of work done by two Japanese scientists in the 90s. And I'm going to butcher their names, so I apologize to them. But Shigeru Yanamaka and Reiko Kikuchi, I'm having trouble seeing my notes, but they filed a patent somewhere in the 90s. You go back and read it and learn about some of the basic stuff they did, where they were essentially taking a mix of substrate, colonizing with mycelium, and then doing some sort of like curing or treating step to set that mycelium and set the structure and make it durable. And a lot of this mycomaterial traction that we're seeing in industry and in startups has come derived from the work of those Japanese scientists. So I think it's important to sort of acknowledge them as being some of the people who kind of helped kick off this revolution. And truthfully, a lot of really interesting mushroom cultivation techniques and the many of the things we regard as the future of fungi have come from Japan, because they're a very mycophilic society and they hold mushrooms in high regard, which is something we don't necessarily do here in the United States. And you could listen to, I think it's episode 8 maybe, when I talk about mycophobia and in North America in particular, and how that's kind of a wild subject. Anyhow, so there are different types of mushroom materials. You have stuff that's actually based on mushrooms, stuff that's based on mycelium, and other sort of fungal based materials, maybe where they're using fungi to make a biopolymer, and then they're processing that in some other way. And mushrooms and mycelium are good for this because the fundamental structure, the biochemistry that makes up fungal cell walls, is composed of chitin, which is a polysaccharide similar to cellulose, but it has some nitrogen in it. It's the same polysaccharide that's in the exoskeletons of like insects and crustaceans, and it is present in fungal cell walls. There are also a whole bunch of beta-glucans, these highly branched, specialized polysaccharides, and those can have special biopolymer properties. And there's a bunch of manoproteins too. So there's a bunch of protein that can have sort of strong structural nets and elements to it. So in a very basic biochemical makeup, there's several different types of polymers in fungal cell walls that could be very useful for biomaterials. And whether we're doing that as like a whole mycelium type of thing that's composed of all of those components, or we're using some biochemistry to kind of fractionate, separate those things out, and build stuff with different components of those biomaterials. It's, depending on what startup we're talking about and what they're doing exactly. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know what everyone is doing. I have a good idea. I can infer from what people have on their websites, but very often they will be very cagey about telling you exactly what they're doing. There's a fruit fly. Get out of here. Shoot. Sorry. These companies can be very cagey about what they're doing because they're developing a technology. And more often than not, what they're doing isn't so hard that someone else couldn't do it. And so they kind of put it behind this like veil of like, oh, it's really amazing technology. And you're like, it's actually pretty simple for the most part. And a lot of people have keyed into this and figured out that if they start a company that has very flashy branding, that they can sell something that you could probably make in your garage. Granted, you're not going to do it at scale the way that they will, and you're not going to refine the technology and optimize things the way they will. That's why they're a company. But story-wise, they need to tell you that this is like very fancy technology, whether or not it is. So why fungi, right? Fungi can be very, very durable. If you think of stuff like polypores and conchs, the agaricon mushroom something that can last for like 80, 90, 100 years. You'll see really old Ganodermas that have grown for many, many years, many seasons in a row. Lots of Fomitopsis. Different kinds of these polypores can just last basically forever, indefinitely, as long as they don't get too wet or, attacked by various things. Because they're polysaccharides, that mixture of the chitin and the beta-glucans and manoproteins, all that stuff, is very resistant to rot and mold. It has all these, bioactive properties that I've talked about in some other episodes, like the medicinal fungi one, or even the mushroom toxin allergen episode last week. All these secondary metabolite type things, and these can, lend very serious structural properties. There's also sclerotia, which is sort of a it's hard to explain, but sort of a stress response structure that mycelium can form. If conditions aren't quite right to fruit, they'll form this very tough sclerotia, which can survive throughout a year to the next year and then go ahead and fruit. And I know stuff like morels form sclerotia and then will fruit out. Even psilocybe mushrooms form sclerotia, and that's what they sell as sort of truffles in Amsterdam. When I think of Mycomaterials, like the classic thing is the Amadou hat. I believe it is a Fomitopsis mushroom that's been sort of shredded, turned into fibers, and then felted together into a hat. And if you guys haven't seen this before, you probably have, because it's what Paul Stamets wears all the time. It's his sort of signature thing. There's a lot of mushroom people who wear this signature mushroom hat. I believe they are originally from Eastern Europe, and they look cool, but if you get them too wet, they will literally melt. So maybe not the best thing if you're mushroom hunting on a rainy day. But they're neat, and they're kind of a fun oddity. They tend to be pretty expensive because I'm sure that milling all that mushroom fiber down takes quite a while and can be fairly labor intensive. But it's pretty neat, and I think it's one of those things that has inspired people to want to make more consumer goods based on mushrooms, because who wouldn't want to wear some cool made out of mushrooms, right? Like, I certainly do. I'm still dreaming of the day that I get my mushroom leather coat. That's when I know I will have made it, when some company reaches out to me and says, hey, do you want a custom mushroom leather coat? Yes, I do. That's a little plug in case any of those companies listen to this podcast. They probably won't, but keep it in mind. Okay, so the thing that we're really taking advantage of with a lot of these mycomaterials is the fact that mycelium is literally living glue, and taking advantage of the biology of mycelium and the way that it's able to creep into stuff, very fine hyphae fibers growing in between substrates, connecting everything. That forms a very strong matrix where you can take, refuse material, stuff like sawdust and, the husks of corn, the things that would normally be sort of agricultural waste, and turn that into very robust building materials or insulation, packaging, all this kind of stuff, is taking advantage of the biology of the mycelium and the way that it grows through things. And I just think that's really cool, because it allows you to make all sorts of really interesting stuff. There is like insulation, there are foams, there are packaging, getting away from mycelium too. You can make like different kinds of like biopolymers into plastics, injectable foams and molds. Getting towards like sort of the mushroom side of things, there are leathers and other types of fabrics and cordage and fibers, and it's absolutely wild. So again, just to kind of reiterate, the fundamental types of MycoMaterials, and this is as far as I understand it, are going to be mycelium-based things, where you have some sort of substrate, whether it be sawdust or grains or agricultural waste, whatever. You're going to inoculate it, and this is often a Ganoderma species that's used, but I believe there are some other types of mycelium that's used as well. And it will colonize essentially the mold, that you've packed with substrate. You put the mycelium in, you try to get it to grow as quickly as possible. Once the mycelium has fully inhabited that mold, you do not let it fruit, you don't let it form a mushroom. You take that mold, pull the mycelium out, and do some sort of like heat or chemical treatment step, and then a curing step to solidify that and make that robust, stable material. It is ultimately made of, plant material and mycelium, so it's biodegradable in a long-term sense. But if you're making packaging, you want something that won't break down in shipping. And if you're making insulation or building materials, you want something that will last a very long time. So there may be other chemical treatment steps that you would put your materials through to resist rot, mold, moisture, that kind of thing. There are MycoMaterials based on the actual mushroom and or sort of sclerotia type things, where you are manipulating the growth conditions to get a very hard surface. And again, this is something often done with Ganoderma, which is like reishi mushrooms that can form very strong surfaces. I don't know if you've played with them, but they can be sort of shiny and not leathery, but you can turn this stuff into a leather-like product if you treat it right. So they're growing them under these very specific conditions, controlling carbon dioxide, oxygen, temperature, humidity, looking very carefully at the particular species and strain, and then even the substrate mixture. And some of the challenges with this stuff is like how you scale it up, like the bed size. It's okay to do this in like sort of a small thing, but if you start trying to make giant couch-sized substrate beds, maybe it doesn't work quite so well, or maybe you don't have like even growth over the whole thing, because it's hard to control those environmental conditions that lead to the production of the sort of ideal mushroom leather fabric, because you have to deal with gas exchange and the actual texture of the product, the durability of the product. There's a lot of things to consider here. And again, this is what the companies are figuring out right now. It's not on me, it's on them. And then there's also sort of biopolymer production. And so this is using fungi as like an expression system. So maybe we're using a yeast or a fusarium or something else, where you're growing fungi in maybe liquid culture, and you're getting them to produce a biopolymer either as part of their cell wall or even possibly excreting it. An expression system could even be a protein. Again, this is where like what we're talking about in terms of it being chitin or beta glucans or manoproteins. What is the biopolymer that we're going for? Is it a polysaccharide? Is it something else? Depends on the particular process. But this has some of the most sort of like broad functionality, because the different types of biopolymers that you can plug into fungi are virtually limitless. And depending on how the expression system works and how say productive it is, I guess you can really scale this up in amazing ways, and then do incredible things with those biopolymers, because we're treating them with similar technological approaches as we would plastic polymers. And so they can be like a one-to-one replacement. And I'd love to see like cling film made from biopolymers. I'd love to see polyester type fabrics made from biopolymers. There's a lot of different things that we could do that would be really sustainable and great, and very effectively help to replace plastics in our modern lives. So I'm sitting here trying to get my laptop to stop making noise, and I apologize if the sound is picking that up. Again, I don't have a studio. I'm just recording at my kitchen table, so I know you can like hear cars going by outside, and maybe someday I will have a studio for this podcast. But for now, again, thanks for bearing with me. So let's talk about Right. Okay. The biopolymer stuff, you can take those polymers and inject air to make foams. You can make films. You can, like I said, do sort of one-to-one plastic replacement type stuff. It's really cool. A lot of the biopolymer game right now is happening with bacteria, but I'm pretty sure there are some places that are also using fungi, whether it's a mycelium-based thing or a single-celled fungi like yeast or a filamentous fungi like Fusarium. There's a lot of different options. Other cool thing about those biopolymer productions is the kind of substrate can be wastewater streams. So you could be potentially taking a wastewater stream, figuring out how to grow even potentially like algae in it and then fungi in it. You could have like an ecological succession where you're able to take a waste stream full of like nasty particles and get things to biotransform that into other materials, which I think is an amazing thing to think about, because we could look at a lot of different human waste streams and use these biological ways of cleaning them up, not just to clean them up and bioremediate them, but to also actually actively produce value-added products from waste that we would otherwise be dumping into water systems or into groundwater, that kind of thing. So great potential. Is it figured out? No, but we're getting there and we're going to keep working on it, especially if there's money involved, because people like money. That is one of the great motivating factors. If you can make money off of it, people will do it, right? So got to keep that in mind, how to make it profitable. Some of the mushrooms that I've seen people using, whether it's mycelium or the mushroom itself, and again, I'm sure there's a much broader set of things that have been experimented with this, but this is just what I've seen people using in the mycomaterial space, is Ganoderma species, so reishi mushrooms, Fomitopsis and foams, other types of sort of conch-like polypores, oyster mushrooms. The mycelium can do all sorts of crazy things, and you can manipulate oyster mycelium easily because it is very adaptable, and there's a lot of different strains now that have been optimized for different types of things. Again, these white rot fungi tend to be, I don't know, they're just fancier, right? Most of the stuff seems like white rot fungi that they're using for these mycomaterials, and sort of polypore-esque type things, or things that would grow on wood and plant material. Primary saprobes, that's what a white rot fungi is. It has the ability to digest lignin and complex enzymes to break down some of these. Lignin is a very complicated molecule. I've talked about it before. But also Trametes, the turkey tail, and then, like I was saying too, probably some yeast and Fusarium and maybe some other fungi that are being used as expression systems. So the companies that are in this space, and this is far from a full lineup of everything, these are just sort of the most significant ones that I've seen and I'm familiar with. EcoVative is, I think they're based in New York. They've done a lot of things over the years with coming out with kind of cool technology where they were taking what was happening in kind of home garage scale level of what people were just kind of messing around with and turning that into a more developed technological platform, and then licensing that technology to other companies. And so a lot of the mushroom packaging stuff that's out there, and a lot of the kind of emerging consumer-facing mycomaterials are actually technology that people have licensed from EcoVative that they developed and are then helping companies implement by selling them the patent or partnering with them to develop the particular types of things they want to make. So right now on EcoVative's website, they have two things that are featured and looks pretty cool. There's this mycocomposite thing, which looks to be basically substrate bound with mycelium that they are then doing some sort of curing step on. You can use that to make packaging, insulation, building materials. There's another one called air mycelium, and this is really neat. I don't remember hearing exactly what the base of this was. I have a suspicion it could be oyster mushroom mycelium, but I don't know. And it's making this like sort of foamy composite thing, which looks really cool, and they're getting mycelium to grow in like 3D. And I don't know if they're actually growing through substrate or they're just kind of messing with it to get it to form this sort of like foamy, squishy stuff. And that's, can be used for insulation, for padding, for making fabrics, for even like pressing down into clothes, depending on how you treat it and what kind of chemistry you do to this mycelium. You can make it very tough or very soft, very airy or very flat. Again, a lot of this is just based on the same sort of technology that we use to process other types of fabrics. And I think that's really cool because we're looking at the base components of what fungi are composed of and then trying to figure out how to treat that in a way that will change its material properties. And that's where material science stuff gets really, really wild. And I have some cool thoughts on that a little later. So yeah, EcoVative is a big company that's definitely innovating in this space. I would love to go visit them sometime. I've seen one of the founders give a talk for Soma, my local mushroom club, and it was very interesting. They're doing some really cool stuff with developing different food products too, and using sort of mycelium to make like bacon and meat-like substitutes. And I know for that they're using oyster mushrooms. I'm not so sure about this mycelium air product, but it was very cool. Again, they're kind of cagey and won't tell you a lot about exactly how they're doing stuff. This at least not on their website, because like it's their technology and they want you to license it from them. So they're not going to just tell you how to do it. But hot tip, if you're ever really interested, you can usually Google the patent that companies have filed, and within those patents are very specific details for how things are done. And so if you are curious about the organism, the process, some of the conditions they're using, Google the patent and you will be able to find it, and you can learn all about a company, because if you ask them what they're doing, they will not tell you. But if you look up their patent, they can't really deny that that's what they're doing. So I've had that experience when I was working sales a few times, where I went into companies, I tried to ask them about what they were doing, they wouldn't tell me a thing, and then I just Googled their patent. I started asking questions. I got very, very nervous. They're like, how do you know that? I was like, it's publicly accessible information on the internet. I just had to look it up. So again, you don't need to freak people out, but it is fun to kind of like look on the back end of things, and the patent will give you details on what companies are doing, because by law they have to like put it into writing to patent a process. So I think that's kind of cool. There's a company called Microworks. I visited them years back, and they were founded by a guy named Phil Ross, who was very much inspired by Shigeru Yamamanaka. Again, I'm butchering his last name, but I apologize. And I think Phil started out by making some kind of like mycelial-based furniture. I saw like a chair and the stools and some cool blocks and sort of structures that he built. And I think he took Mycoworks and has built it very much as a startup since like 2013, 2014. And they just got their Series C funding. So they got like 125 million to continue to build out what they've been doing. I was interviewing with them at one point talking about being their like production lead, and that was it wasn't a good fit for me experience wise, and it wasn't what I wanted to like. I didn't want to throw my life into a startup. That's way too much work. I have previously had great relations with Mycoworks, but the last few times I've reached out to them, they've pretty much ignored me. So I don't know if they remember me or not, but they are making a mushroom-based leather, which is very cool. As far as I understand it, they're essentially growing big beds of Ganoderma, manipulating the CO2, O2, humidity, pH, all those kinds of conditions to form a thick or thin, relatively thin layer of kind of like reishi, leather-like stuff on top. I don't know if it's technically sclerotia or not, but they're forming this sort of reishi leather. Then they're skinning that off and doing some like chemical treatments to it, to tanning it basically, to make it into a leather-like product. And I think Mycoworks is probably making the coolest mushroom leather stuff. The products I've seen from them, the samples I've touched, have felt very real, very, beautiful looking. They're very attractive, and I'm still waiting to kind of see the full mushroom couch, or like I said, mushroom leather jacket. That would all be awesome. I have asked them before to see if I could get some samples to kind of like show off or play with, and they were very cagey about it. Again, I think as these startup companies have moved more and more into the space of being like legitimate companies and not just kind of people messing around in their basements, they get social media managers and departments who are like not as much fun to talk to, because I like talking to scientists. Scientists will talk back to you, but HR people and social media people will not talk to you. So again, I think that's part of what I've run into when I've tried to deal with these companies as companies rather than as people. So who knows? Another one that I visited is called Bolt Threads. They're now making a product called Milo Leather, which is licensed from EcoVative. And I don't think they want to talk about that, because I believe there was a little bit of a falling out there. I don't know. I used to have really good relations with Bolt Threads, and at some point they started ignoring me. And at one point I was going to take them out for a foray. And then next thing I knew, they'd like gone all corporate and no longer wanted to talk to me. So c'est la vie. I do have a scientist friend who's working there, and she's awesome, does some really cool stuff. But I believe they are similarly making a mushroom leather, this Milo leather product, to Mycoworks, but instead of the bed thing, they're growing lots of Ganoderma tissue and then like milling it and recapitulating it as a leather-like fabric. And so that's got traction. It's a shame, because Bolt Threads originally started out making spider silk, which was awesome. And then I think someone kind of beat them to the punch on the whole marketing thing, and they lost the market for that, which was a shame because I think they were far, far ahead in terms of technology. But maybe that's why they've kind of moved to this like much more corporate, fashion-based way of talking about Milo leather instead of like having it be kind of sciencey. I don't know. I'd like to see them succeed. I'd like to see all these companies succeed, very much so, because we need this kind of discourse in society, and it'd be really cool to see mushroom leathers and fabrics taking off in popular culture and specifically in fashion too. And it's working. I've seen a lot of fashion designers and artists and people just fascinated by the promise of the stuff and the desire to be more sustainable, especially when it comes to fashion, because so much of what happens in fashion is very unsustainable. So there's a company called Mogu. I believe they're Italian-based. They've been mostly focused on packaging and building materials. There's a company called Mycotech, or MYCL, which I believe is an Indian-based company, also producing a mushroom-like leather or mushroom leather called Mylia. These things, all the products I mentioned are all like trademarked. That's why they have these specific names. And I think they're focused again, sort of consumer-facing goods of mushroom leather-like products, whether it's sandals or jackets or furniture, whatever. There's some great resources in this space, and that's just the list of like short list of companies that I could find. They're working on these things. I know that there's more. I know there's some stuff in the Netherlands and Germany. There's a lot of like designers and studios and places that have worked on this stuff. I'm not totally sure which ones have spun out as companies, which ones have gotten funding, which ones will continue to be around, but I'm going to keep my finger on the pulse of things and try to keep you guys updated. But yeah, there's some great resources, and I was just like looking this stuff up and trying to read about it. There is the HyphelFusion.network. Mycoworks, the website, has a resource tab, which has some great links in there. There's Glimps, GLIMPS.bio, and I believe that's a cooperative based in the Netherlands that also runs the Biofab forum. And so there's a lot of cool information on there and tutorials and resources about like different types of biofabrication that's going on right now. The Myco Hack Lab in Finland. So these are all things that you can Google. And if you just Google Micromaterials, a lot of these things will just come up. Like I said, there's probably a lot more links that didn't necessarily get prioritized by Google that people are doing really cool work. So if you know about something that I didn't mention, please tell me about it. I'd love to hear about it. If you're a designer or a studio or someone working on this stuff, I am fascinated and I really want to learn more. Especially if you're in California or near the Bay Area, I'd love to visit you. If you happen to be somewhere else, I'd love to visit you too, but I might need some help getting there, or at least a trip itinerary, that kind of thing. So there are some amazing artists and studios, like I mentioned, out there working on stuff. I just recently saw a exhibition by Neri Oxman, who is a phenomenal artist and engineer, scientist. She's just an incredible thought leader that did a lot of work at the MIT Media Lab. And she has worked extensively with mixtures of different biopolymers and how like using 3D printing to recapitulate natural structures and fibers. And it's just some amazing stuff with this biomaterial space. And so I'm really excited to see where she's going in the future. And I believe she has a company now that they're turning some of these things into consumer products. And so I'm just blown away by the work that she's done. There's a great company called Terraform, which again seems sort of like a collaborative big studio. And there's a lot of people involved in it. I'm not totally sure the history of it, but they have some very, very cool sort of future concept furniture and art. If you look up Mycoform, you can see some of the things they've put together. It's really interesting looking. There's Gianluca Tabellini, I don't know. That's an Italian designer who's based in Zurich. They've done some really cool, developing different types of design concepts with Myco-based materials. And there's a studio called Tai Samal, I believe in Wales, and they've done some great mycelial-based stuff. This is just barely scratching the surface. Because again, there's a lot of places out there doing this MycoMaterial stuff, and whether they're focused on packaging or building materials, or there was an article that went viral a while ago about like a high school student who built a canoe out of mycelium using the same idea of kind of like taking a mold full of substrate, colonizing it with mycelium, and then using like a curing step to basically set the texture of it, and probably spraying with some binders and sealants and stuff like that, was able to make a canoe. I've seen the idea of coffins, and I think that's phenomenal because, like, if you think about the way we put coffins into the ground, we put like giant chunks of like expensive wood and plastic and metal. And like a human body decomposes, it's organic, but we put it in things that don't decompose. Like, what are we doing? So a mycelium based coffin makes a lot more sense than anything else. I'm sure you could fancy it up and make it look nice on the outside. It doesn't have to look like, that sort of bare mycelium stuff. And I think that's one thing too, that people, when we're talking about packaging materials, are going to be fine with mycelium based packaging materials looking like mycelium. But if we're going to start using it for other things, we really have to think about like the public perception and put a sheen on it to make it look a little bit more like what we're used to seeing with plastics or wood or other materials we might be trying to replace. But with that said, there's a real responsibility to move forward with these biomaterials because we need to get away from our reliance on plastics. We need to find sustainable alternatives. And this is not just like coming from a hippie kind of place. This is like, if we want to survive as a species on this planet, we need to figure it out. So this is coming from a sense of necessity, not just now, but in the future, because for some reason people have very short perceptions, especially in like a political and business world. They look like 6 months ahead or just to the next election, and that's all they care about. But looking 5, 10, 15, 50, 100 years down the line, you can see that we're doing some practices that are incredibly unsustainable, and we need to change the way that we do things. And biomaterials, especially these mycomaterials, I think is a great first step that's relatively easy. The technology is growing. It's really interesting. Companies have a major responsibility to take this stuff up. Instead of shipping everything in styrofoam, which is an awful material, we could be shipping things in mycomaterials. And we need to see companies stepping up and offering those sustainable alternatives. And I think if they pitch it the right way, or they give people an option, I'd be happy to pay an extra couple bucks in shipping to make sure that I'm not getting a whole bunch of styrofoam that I have to throw out. I'll get like a mycelium block that I can put in my compost, or I can at least put in the trash knowing that it will break down. So there's a real eye on sustainability and responsibility, but also customer and consumer preference and education. If we teach people that there are alternatives that are viable and economically viable, I think most people would rather do something that's good for the planet rather than bad for the planet. There may always be someone out there who wants to like smoke a giant pipe full of styrofoam, but that's on them. That's on, the guy who wants to throw his trash out the window and run, drive a huge truck and belch as much, methane and CO2 into the atmosphere as possible. There will always be those people. But for the rest of us who are a little bit more sane-minded, we can find these better alternatives and hopefully work with them. But we have to make sure that they're durable, we have to make sure that they're financially viable, and we have to make sure that they have a legitimate market share. And I think one of the issues I've seen with some of this, mushroom leather stuff is it's catering to a very specific demographic, right? There might be vegans or people who are concerned about cruelty when it comes to production of leather, and rightly so. I can't say anything good about, animal husbandry as it goes to making leather. It is what it is. We kill things and use their hides. It's pretty barbaric. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm sitting on a chair right now that's made out of some animal thing. I'd prefer if this was like a mushroom chair. That'd be awesome. But I don't have that, option. And even if there is that option, I might be paying like $1,000 per chair instead of like $50. So we have to make sure that there are these sustainable and viable options. And the only way to do that is to start doing it. So what we're seeing now is these initial steps. And I think that's where you're seeing some of these mycomaterials entering into high fashion, because everything kind of filters down from that. So we have to build the infrastructure to produce and use these materials, but also educate people on the possibilities, on the sustainability. And companies have to stand up and make a stand in terms of their responsibility to say that this is what we're doing and here's why we're doing it, and justify the cost to things, but also not pass the cost on to the consumer necessarily, but make it work internally such they can offer some of these, mushroom packaging at least relatively similar costs, so that people will actually want to use it. Because if the difference between having, a couch shipped to you using mycomaterials versus not is like thousands of dollars, people are going to go with a cheaper option. So there are people out there who can afford to buy really expensive things, and I hope that they do, to help support these companies as they're cutting their teeth. But we've got to figure out a way to like make it scalable and make it acceptable to common people. So anyhow, that's my rant on Micromaterials. I think they're super cool. I would absolutely love to get like my hands on a sample of some mushroom leather, some of these mushroom mycelium packaging stuff, and just kind of play around with it. But again, like I said, it's really not that hard to do some of these things at home. At least like the mushroom packaging stuff is pretty easy to do. You can pack a mold full of substrate. You get some cultures, and I know there's a company out there. When I was looking at Mycomaterials, one kept coming up. I think it was called Mycelium.net or something like that. They were selling cultures for some of these Mycomaterial mycelium based things, and you could probably create your own coffin or kayak or whatever structure you want. You can make yourself a mushroom chair. Like I said, those resources I mentioned have some great kind of like home hacks and ways to do this stuff. So you can approach it yourself. None of it is really that hard. If you want to start a startup company, that's a lot of work. But I would say that a lot of people who are asking me constantly about like mushroom careers and, hey, how do I become a professional mycologist? And well, there's not a lot of money in mycology. Academics don't make a lot of money. And previous to now, there hasn't been a ton of money in mushroom cultivation. There's some, but it's a lot of work. It's very hard, and it's a constant grind. Your entire life becomes running a farm. I think that if you're interested in becoming a mycologist and making more money, potentially being in a startup space, working for some of these companies like EcoVative, Microworks, Bolt Threads, Mogu, etc., they probably have positions where they're willing to pay you as a scientist, although they may hire people who have bioprocessing, engineering, diverse skill sets rather than just sort of a mycologist. And so, but that is a space that you could go into if you're interested in sort of a mushroom-based career. So anyhow, it's been fun talking to you guys. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to talk about next week. As always, I kind of figure it out a few days ahead of time. But if you have any suggestions, feel free to hit me up, shoot me a message. I'm hoping the audio on this recording went well and that everyone has enjoyed listening to these podcasts. As always, if you want to learn more from me, you can check out fascinatedbyfungi.com. There's an About Me page. There's a mushroom discount page. I'm hopefully going to be doing a little bit more work with Northspore in the future, so you'll be hearing more about them and some of their cultivation products. I have lots of discount codes for different companies on the mushroom discount page. I have merch on the Mush merch page. I have my Patreon. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, what else? Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook. This podcast is here on Spotify, Callin, YouTube, and Apple. So please share it with your friends. Please write me a review if you get a chance. But again, I appreciate you all and wishing everyone a good week and much love. Bye-bye.